Welcome to growing the Bitcoin developer ecosystem here at Building on Bitcoin. We're going to talk about the importance of Bitcoin developers and Bitcoin development in general. Even though it probably cuts against what the casual Twitter user believes, Bitcoin development still exists and is critically important. With me to discuss is Alex Miller, Daniel Fogg, Mike Schmidt, and Matt Lugano. We'll go around and do a very brief introduction so that we can get into the meat of this discussion. An example of a brief introduction is, I'm your moderator, George Kaludis of CoinDesk. So why don't we go around the horn? Let's go Alex, Daniel, Mike, then Matt.
Help if I unmuted. I'm Alex Miller. I'm the CEO of Hero, building Bitcoin dev tools.
Hi, I'm Daniel Fogg. I'm the president of IOV Labs, and we're focused on building out Rootstock and Riff.
Mike Schmidt, executive director at Brink. We're a 501c3 charity who takes in funds from the community and routes those to Bitcoin developers working on the Bitcoin core software and protocol.
Hey, I'm Matt Luongo. I'm the CEO of Thesis. We're a venture studio. We launched, you guys might know, Fold, and then TB2C, a Bitcoin bridge to Ethereum.
Awesome. Thanks for that, guys. Very brief. That's what I like to see. So let's get into the meat of it. The importance of Bitcoin development. Why do we need to not ossify? What are these new challenges? Do we have security issues? Do you have scalability issues? Do we need super smart contracts? So I want to ask the first question of Daniel. What do you think the biggest technological challenge facing Bitcoin is right now?
So the reason IOV Labs created Rootstock and launched it back in 2017 is that we believe that the Bitcoin provided this incredible store of value. It was this incredible security machine, if you will, but the ability to program against Bitcoin and run smart contracts in Bitcoin was still, at that point, a very long way off. So we launched Rootstock as the first sidechain to Bitcoin, EVM compatible blockchain network, and we've been growing it ever since. To be honest, I mean, we built Rootstock in some ways because we thought that Bitcoin was perfect, and we wanted to provide a place for EVM developers and people building DeFi applications to build on Bitcoin without having to necessarily tamper with the core protocol itself, if you will. Since then, I mean, we've just been focused relentlessly on what we call everyday DeFi, which is this idea that the next phase of cryptocurrency adoption is going to be driven by users in predominantly emerging markets using cryptocurrencies to pay, save, earn, and lend, and using those use cases to get into the problem. So yeah, I mean, that's really our position, if you will. Bitcoin's perfect. That's why we built Rootstock. It's something completely different.
Right. So you invoked building DeFi on Bitcoin, and you talked a little bit about smart contracts. So I want to bring Alex in here and ask, okay, Bitcoin has smart contracts now. Mm-hmm. Now we know that. That's how the Lightning Network actually works. But are they smart enough?
No, I mean, they can always be smarter. So, I mean, I agree strongly with Daniel on this, that like messing too much with the Bitcoin L1 is a really bad idea, right? There's a reason that it's the most trusted. There's a reason that it's like the sound money in the crypto space or whatever, right? Bitcoin's the original thing, and we don't want to mess with that too much, which is why I think layer twos are such an important development for Bitcoin is, and this even goes back to like what Satoshi's original vision was back in talking about in 2010, 2011, seeing additional networks bring the additional functionality. So I think there's a lot more that can be done to really get to the point of the fully expressive smart contracts, right? Lightning is great because it does amazing things for payments and speeds, but you don't get, and it does it trustlessly, but you don't get the fully expressive smart contracts thing. So like this is one thing that folks in the Stacks ecosystem are working on, is basically like the launch of SBTC that's coming up later this year. That's all about creating like a trustless synthetic Bitcoin asset that lets you actually build smart contracts that you're not having to trust a custodian, you're not having to trust wrapping, which I think is pretty key to the Bitcoin ethos, and get a lot closer to that experience like you have on Ethereum, where obviously one of the advantages with Ethereum is you do have compute and money in the same layer, which has trade-offs. But fundamentally, it means you can, non-custodially, trustlessly create smart contracts that can interact with money. I think that's the next real big unlock that we need to see in the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Understood. So both of you, Daniel and Alex, have talked about the importance of layer one. And so before we get too far afield and start talking about all these crazy other things, pegs in, pegs out, all that stuff, I need to go back to Mike, or go to Mike Schmidt here. So the perception that Bitcoin is a boomer coin is probably very funny to someone like you, who's very intimately familiar with the Bitcoin Optech newsletter. But how can we bridge the gap, right? Bitcoin Optech is obviously a great resource, but what is missing? Why are people under the impression that no development is happening on layer one?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so part of my contribution to the Bitcoin ecosystem is contributor at Bitcoin Optech. And for folks that aren't familiar, we have a weekly technical newsletter that covers developments in the Bitcoin and Lightning spaces. And we also do workshops. We have a wiki, and there's a bunch of great technical tools for people that are aware of them, to your point. And one thing, a funny anecdote to illustrate everything that's not happening in Bitcoin allegedly, is that our coverage last year in these newsletters equated to a 200-page book. So in 1 year, there was enough developments worthy of our coverage. We don't cover everything, that we have a 200-page book on it. So there's obviously work being done, but what can we do to surface that work to a broader audience, let's say of developers that are in the crypto space and maybe aren't aware of these innovations that are happening in Bitcoin and Lightning? Optech did a workshop called an executive briefing, in which we digested some of that technical information for a crypto executive audience to be familiar with the goings on in Bitcoin at the level that made sense for that audience. I think that we as an organization can do more of that. And I also think that there's an opportunity in the space for other players to sort of digest the technical content that's coming out of the community, which we cover in Optech as like what's happening, the what is happening. But I think that there's value in being able to digest that for a broader audience into, let's say, a so what. So these things happened in Bitcoin. There's discussions of new opcodes, or there's discussions of this and that. So what? And I think that can maybe touch a broader audience who can then get more intrigued about what is going on in the ecosystem and maybe poke their head in, maybe contribute, and maybe that's a pipeline to onboard some more junior developers to the ecosystem. I also think being part of conversations like this, or being part of a consensus conference, also reached out and wanted to do a Bitcoin protocol hour-long presentation at their conference. And I think being a part of those conversations is important, because there's a pool of developers and entrepreneurs that are paying attention to those discussions. And I think for Bitcoiners to hide from those discussions takes away the opportunity to intrigue those people and let them be aware of these innovations and what can be done.
So Mike, I want to ask you a follow-up question on that before I bring that into the conversation. You mentioned these junior developers, and your work at Brink has to do with getting money to developers who are working on free and open source software, right? They're working for free and they need to, make a living somehow. How do we pay Bitcoin developers well enough so that we can attract and keep the brightest minds working on Bitcoin?
Yeah, it's a good question. Early on, all the development was nights and weekends and people donating time. But over time, as the industry has matured, the expertise level has gone up in order to contribute. And we're at a point now where there are people getting paid to work on the Bitcoin Core software and Lightning software. And I think that is only going to continue to increase. And right now, there's a bunch of grant giving organizations. There's some for-profit companies that employ open source developers. And I think as we move along that spectrum, we can go from smaller one-off grants for people doing this good work into a more full-time role. And whether that's a series of year-long grants like we do at Brink, or whether it looks like something else, I think the trend is in that direction. And in order for folks to see this as a career path and have it be something sustainable, that's what we need for people to want to invest their time. And I do think we have some catching up to do in the Bitcoin industry on, no one right now is going to be making, $300,000, $400,000 Amazon, engineer compensation working on Bitcoin software. And I think we need to work as an industry to at least bridge that gap so that it's a little bit more reasonable for talented folks to contribute.
Right. I think that makes a lot of sense, Mike. And on one hand, we have this sort of grant-focused approach, but on the other hand, Matt, who is a co-founder, I think, correct, at Thesis, you guys work with for-profit Bitcoin companies. So what kind of development issues are those kind of companies working through?
I think we all have talked a lot about the game theory of Bitcoin. We all probably have thoughts on it, but this is our chance to talk about the game theory of Bitcoin development. And it's pretty rough, right? So it's hard to find Bitcoin talent. And then once you've found someone that you want to invest in, it's hard to learn. We're constantly patching holes of things that in other ecosystems I consider pretty basic. And this isn't because we're not all trying. Obviously, we're all trying, but there's just not the same incentives, right, for people to learn and for people to have like an easy dev onboarding experience. So I think what I found is, earlier you asked what the biggest technological challenge of Bitcoin is, and I think I would say it's actually social. How can we make sure Bitcoin maintains its monetary premium forever, while everyone else can just create a new token and fund developers, which is a lot easier. And frankly, from my own experience back in the day in like 2013, when I first started messing around with Bitcoin, it's also a lot easier to learn a lot of these new stacks. Like, fewer and fewer people today are excited about C++. They're going to be doing Rust, or if it's closer to app dev, they're going to do Go or Python or something. And so I think that a lot of our projects are focused on how can we make sure that Bitcoin remains the unit of account, regardless of where the dev comes from. And I know that's not just about development and engineering, and it's also about our culture.
Right. So we've kind of talked a little bit about how there needs to be consistent development on layer one, but a lot of the conversations happening around this conference in general and in the Stacks community in general is building things away from Bitcoin. Whether you do believe that's the way to go forward or not, I want to ask you, Alex, assuming we need more developers working on Bitcoin's layer one, does funding and encouraging development away from Bitcoin take away or benefit Bitcoin's development?
I think it absolutely benefits it. One of the reasons that developer ecosystems in general take off is just the amount of excitement and activity around it, right? This is something, so I spent 8.5 years at Stack Overflow, the entire time working with like developer communities, how you build them, how you engage them. And one of the number one things that we saw there was how many other people are developing in this space on this platform, right? So the more developer activity that is happening around Bitcoin in general, the more excitement there's going to be. And I mean, I want to say like, and then you get the development for free, but like people aren't purely money motivated, right? They want to be working on something cool. They want to be working on something interesting. And so yeah, the more that Bitcoin becomes a boomer coin or something, or it feels like a place where you can't do something innovative or where the community is going to fight against you, the harder it will be to get good talent. And then on the flip side, the more you make it feel cool and like there are innovative things. I mean, this is just look at the amount of energy and things that have been built in the last 3 months, 3-4 months since the release of Ordinals, right? Like it's exciting, it's cool. There's this, and like you just have people flooding in, trying new things on it, right? So I think the more we can drive that type of energy, whether it's on the L1, or I think this is, again, it comes back to L2s actually help with this too, because it creates that excitement and creates more people to work with there. Obviously, they drive fees, which contribute to the security budget. And, in theory, you could even bleed off some of that to help fund development as time goes on if you really wanted to. So I think just anything we can do to help people feel like, hey, there's exciting things happening here. There's the future. Like, Bitcoin is the money that's going to make the difference here, right? Unlike every other kind of crap coin of the 14,000 or however many are out there now that anyone can just go spin up. Like Bitcoin has a credibility that will actually let it run the way. This is what we talk to people about all the time. If you're trying to build something that's going to be around in 20 years, like you want to know that the thing you're building on top of is going to be around in 20 years. And so I think, yeah, the more we can drive that message with developers, the more that come in, and that just creates a really virtuous cycle that makes it easier and easier to pull in more good core devs that train new people and bring them on from day one.
That makes sense. Daniel, I want to ask you basically that exact same question. Do you think that working on things away from Bitcoin development helps and or hurts Bitcoin development culture?
So the way that Rootstock has the merge mining process, right? So the security of Rootstock is anchored into the security of the Bitcoin blockchain. And there are many benefits to this, but one of them is that transaction fees that are generated through Rootstock directly fund Bitcoin miners, right? So it adds an additional revenue stream to Bitcoin miners. So while I won't kind of cover the same point that Alex did, one of the things that Rootstock does do is provide additional revenue streams and support for the Bitcoin miners, which is another important thing that I think Rootstock does for the Bitcoin ecosystem. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think, the game here is adoption, very simply. And the more people, the easier it is to build things using Bitcoin, regardless of what layer you're doing it in, regardless of what purpose you're doing it for, whether it be ordinals or otherwise. That is a benefit to all. Now, obviously, some of those benefits are more indirect or direct, but it brings attention, it brings excitement, as Alex said, and that's just generally great. So I don't necessarily think that any different type of development is good or bad. It's sort of any usage or building on Bitcoin on any layer is positive. But yeah, I mean, one of the benefits we provide is that support to the Bitcoin miners, which is not to be underestimated during the last couple of years when Bitcoin miner revenue streams, as we've seen, have been significantly impacted. So yeah,
that makes sense. I want to ask a very leading question of you, Matt. So we've talked a lot about these decentralized ideas, free open source, but your company works for profit companies.
Yep.
And since there's some sort of demonization of working on Bitcoin for money from some of the laser-eyed gatekeepers, I want to give you a chance to convince everyone that making money while working on FOSS or for companies that use FOSS isn't a bad thing or an attack on Bitcoin.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the name of the game is sustainability. And if I can fund a dev for a year, that's great. We've built the public good, right? But if I can find a way to fund a dev indefinitely, right? That's far superior than like a fixed grant, for example, which is not to denigrate obviously that work. I think it's a huge part of bridging talent into the space, but ultimately I'm looking at building situations where we're not just committing to Bitcoin Core and pushing out bits that people aren't going to like, but where we actually have compelling proof that people want to use our software, that they want to fund our software being built, and then hopefully we get to use some of that to go to the public good. And honestly, I think Bitcoin culture is. I mean, gosh, I don't even like to paint it. It's not even true anymore. It's not Bitcoin culture anymore, but crypto Twitter and the laser-eyed interest in eating their young. Like, why would we ever tear down business people for charging a fee and driving a service? Most of what we believe in Bitcoin takes like the core ideas of capitalism kind of as like a given, right? So yeah, I think it's pretty frustrating when on the one hand, of course, this is kind of how the world is. Everyone wants their free stuff and no one wants to pay. That's okay. We'll just make something so great that they'll do it anyway.
Right. I think that makes a lot of sense. And unfortunately, guys, we really don't have that much time left. This is a big panel. We have about 2 minutes left. So I want to give each person 30 seconds to kind of go off and say their one thing, the one takeaway when they hear you on this panel, what they should get from you. So Alex, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think as with anything, the best thing to do is just get out there and build a thing, right? Like, it's mess around with it, try it out. I think most people, especially anyone who's interested in this space, is someone who does better by learning by doing. So check out, there's a lot of different projects in the Bitcoin space, Rootstock, Stacks, Lightning. Like, just pick something, start messing around with it, and contribute back by being part of the community.
Yeah. Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, two things really, which is that there's been some incredible DeFi and Bitcoin applications built out on Rootstock, Sovereign, Money on Chain, Tropicus. Go and check those out for sure. We believe very strongly that everyday DeFi is the way. The whole point of Bitcoin and crypto adoption is to get the 99% using it, not the 1%. So go and build something for everyday people. And we're giving out grants. So come say hello.
Awesome. Matt?
Come build Ethereum, Stacks, Rootstock, L1, whatever you want. But if you're interested in a Bitcoin dev job, hit me up.
And Mike, last word.
Yeah, I think of Bitcoin as a censorship resistant, seizure resistant, inflation resistant digital bearer asset. So what I'm excited about is supporting the community of developers that are working to strengthen those properties about Bitcoin, whether that's Gloria's work supporting L2 with package relay or some of the Airlay innovations that'll help with decentralization. I'm excited about all of it, and that's why I'm at Brink trying to help make it happen.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. That was Growing the Bitcoin Developer Ecosystem with Alex Miller, Daniel Fogg, Mike Schmidt, and Matt Logano.